Let's now actually start to learn how to solve callback hell by using promises. And we're going to start off by using a promise for the HTTP request instead of the callback. And this is going to work because the superagent library actually has support for promises out of the box. And so we can simply use them here. For node functions coming from internal node packages like read file, we will actually have to build the promise ourselves. And we will do that later in the next lecture or so. But for now, I want you to learn how to consume promises and only later how to build them. Okay? So again, we're going to start with the superagent library and more specifically with the get method here. Because this method here actually returns a promise. So without going into too much detail for now, a promise basically implements the concept of a future value, so basically a value that we are expecting to receive sometime in the future. So it's a bit like us saying, hey server, or hey API, please get me a random dog image in the background and let me know when you're ready. And then give me that data back. Okay? So that random image is the value that we expect sometime in the future. And that is exactly the kind of request that we're doing using the superagent library in this example, right? And the get method that we use, again, will automatically and immediately return a promise as soon as we start the request. So the promise doesn't have a value yet because the server is actually still getting the data from the server asynchronously in the background, but the promise is immediately available and basically promising us that it will get some data back in the future. Okay? Does that make sense? And that state of the promise in that case, so right in the beginning, is a pending promise. So it's still pending, it still hasn't gotten back with any data. Okay? So here at this point, we already have a promise that we can work with. Now all we need to do is to consume it, which basically means that we wait for it to come back with the data. And to do that, we use the then method on it. Okay? So all we do is to use then, and then in here, we pass a callback function. This callback function will then be called as soon as the promise is done doing its work and has come back with the data. And that data is then available as an argument to that callback. I like to call that the result. And so again, in that callback function that we have here, we then have that data available. So let's take all of this here and put it into this then callback function and actually get rid of this. So we no longer need that and give it a save. Now you might be thinking, well, we're still using callbacks here, right? And yeah, that's actually true. So this does not look like a big change for now, but after we transform the whole example here to promises, you will see the big impact that promises will have on our code. Okay? So that's basically because if we have multiple promises, we will be able to chain these callbacks onto one another instead of nesting them, which is already a huge improvement. Okay? Now, one thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that a promise, as soon as it comes back with the data, is called a resolved promise. So in the beginning, it's a pending promise, and when it successfully gets the data, it is then a resolved promise. However, a resolved promise might not always be successful, because there might have been an error. So we say that a resolved promise can either be fulfilled or rejected. The fulfilled promise actually has a result that we want to use, while a rejected promise is when there was an error. So remember the situation that we had before where we had a wrong dog breed. So in that case, we had an error and we handled that error using this piece of code here. Okay? Now the thing with this then method here is that it actually only handles fulfilled promises, but it doesn't do anything if there was an error. Because for that, we actually have another method. So another mechanism of handling that. And that is the catch method. So right after the then method, we can chain another method which is called catch. Okay? And so this one will get called if there was an error. And so in here, we actually have access to that error object. And so let's now go ahead, take this piece of code and put it here. And so now we can get rid of this. Because actually in this then method, we have no information if there was an error or not, because it only ever gets called in case the promise was successful. So if it's a fulfilled promise. Okay, so this is kind of nice to actually separate these two cases automatically for us. So instead of having that weird handling that we had before, we can simply write all the logic for the successful case, which is the most usual one, because we usually always expect everything to work alright. But in case there was an error, we can then put some other logic down here into this error handler here. Okay, so we keep that nicely separated. Let's change it here again. Give this one another save to run it again. And so here we have not found. And so you see that it actually did enter this catch method here and didn't do any of the things that's in this then method. Let's now go ahead, fix this here, close it, give this one a save, and here we go. So that is how we consume promises. So we started with this method here, which returned a promise, and so on that we can chain the then method, which handles basically the successful case, and then in the end we also chain the catch method, which handles the unsuccessful, so the rejected promise. But as I said before, this kind of still looks like it did before, right? So we still have this callback function up here. So all of this callback function, and also here inside our then method, we have this callback function of the write file. So let's go ahead and fix that right in the next video.